The moment Jean-Claude Van Damme stopped being an action hero. The director yelled, "Cut!" But Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't stop. The cameras kept rolling, but nobody on the Hollywood set knew what to do. The crew of 200 people, the extras in their elaborate costumes, even the stunt coordinators who had seen everything in their 30-year careers. Everyone froze. Because in that moment, surrounded by fake explosions and carefully choreographed chaos, the most famous action star in the world became something nobody expected, a broken man who understood that some things matter more than entertainment. The young stunt double standing 10 feet away wasn't supposed to be there. Movie sets have strict protocols. Background performers stay in background. Stunt doubles work with stunt coordinators. Nobody, absolutely nobody, interrupts Jean-Claude Van Damme during a take. But 19-year-old Danny Martinez had been carrying something inside him for months, and what he said during that Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles would stop production, break every Hollywood rule, and change everyone on that set forever. This is the story of the words that made Jean-Claude Van Damme cry. And what happened next showed the world who he really was. How we got here. 3 weeks earlier, the Martinez family had received a call that seemed like a miracle. Danny, a young martial artist from East L.A., had been selected as a stunt double for the new Van Damme action thriller Final Strike. After years of training in his father's small dojo, struggling to make rent while pursuing his dream, this was his big break. The Martinez family wasn't wealthy. Danny's father, Carlos, had emigrated from Mexico with nothing but his knowledge of traditional martial arts and a dream of opening his own school. For 20 years, he'd run a tiny gym in a rough neighborhood, teaching kids discipline and self-respect through karate and kickboxing. The pay was small, but the impact was immeasurable. Danny had grown up on that gym floor, learning not just how to fight, but how to fall, how to get back up, and most importantly, how to never give up. His hero wasn't a movie star or an athlete. It was his father, who worked 3 jobs to keep the dojo open and still found time to train the neighborhood kids for free. But life, as it often does, had other plans. 2 months before Danny got the call about the movie, Carlos Martinez collapsed during a training session. The doctors found stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The man who had taught his son that the body was a temple, that discipline and health were everything, was dying. And there was nothing his lifetime of martial arts training could do to fight this enemy. Standing on the set of Final Strike, Danny felt the weight of everything on his shoulders. The elaborate action sequences, the million-dollar explosions, the perfectly choreographed fights. It all felt surreal when his father was lying in a hospital bed, getting weaker every day. The moment everything changed, it was supposed to be a standard action sequence. Jean-Claude, now in his 50s, but still incredibly athletic, was filming the climactic fight scene of the movie. 15 stunt performers, intricate choreography, pyrotechnics, and camera work that would make audiences believe they were watching real combat. Danny was positioned as a background fighter, one of the anonymous bad guys who would be defeated in the carefully planned mayhem. He'd done the rehearsals, he knew his marks, he understood his role. Get hit, fall down, stay down. Simple. But as Jean-Claude moved through his martial arts sequence with that trademark precision and grace that had made him famous, something inside Danny broke. The cameras were rolling. Jean-Claude was in his element, every movement controlled, every strike perfectly timed. The director was calling out instructions. The crew was focused on their technical precision. And then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times online, Danny stepped out of his position and spoke. Mr. Van Damme. The set didn't go silent immediately. The other stunt performers continued their choreographed movements. Jean-Claude finished his spinning kick. But then Danny's voice came again, louder this time, trembling with the kind of raw emotion that can't be faked. Mr. Van Damme, my father is dying. This time, Jean-Claude heard it. He turned toward the sound, his hands still raised in fighting position, confusion crossing his face. The other performers slowed their movements. The director looked up from his monitor. "Cut!" someone yelled, but the cameras kept rolling. And then Danny said the words that would change everything. He said you were the reason he never gave up. When the action hero became human, Jean-Claude Van Damme had been in hundreds of fights on screen. He'd faced every kind of villain, survived every impossible situation, delivered countless lines about honor and perseverance. But standing on that soundstage, looking at a 19-year-old stunt performer with tears in his eyes, every script, every character, every piece of movie magic fell away. "What's your name, son?" Jean-Claude asked, his Belgian accent thick with emotion, his action hero posture melting into something more human. "Danny Martinez. My dad owns a dojo in East L.A. He's been watching your movies since I was little. When things got hard, when the bills piled up, when people said he should quit and get a real job, he'd put on one of your movies and say, 'Look at Van Damme. He never gives up. We don't give up either.' The elaborate movie set had become something else entirely. A sacred space where protocol didn't matter, where million-dollar productions didn't matter, where the only thing that mattered was a young man honoring his dying father. Jean-Claude walked over to Danny, navigating around cameras and equipment. The crew members moved aside, creating a path. When he reached the young man, Jean-Claude did something that in 30 years of making action movies he'd never done. He took off his fighting gloves and placed his hands on Danny's shoulders. "Your father," Jean-Claude said, his voice softer now, stripped of performance. "He teaches martial arts to kids." Danny nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. 20 years. Never missed a day, even when he was sick. Even when the cancer started. He said the kids needed someone to believe in them. Jean-Claude was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the massive production had ground to a halt. 200 crew members, dozens of extras, millions of dollars worth of equipment. All of it motionless, focused on this conversation. "You know what your father did?" Jean-Claude finally said. "He did what every real fighter does. He turned his pain into purpose. He took what was hard in his life and used it to make other people stronger. That's not just martial arts. That's heroism." The real action sequence, what happened next, wasn't in any script. Jean-Claude turned to the director, to the crew, to everyone watching. "We're done for today," he announced, not asking, telling. "This young man has something more important to do than make a movie." He grabbed Danny gently by the arm. "Come on, we're going to see your father." The ride from the Hollywood studio to East L.A. took 45 minutes. Jean-Claude Van Damme, still in his action movie costume, sat in the passenger seat of Danny's beat-up Honda Civic, asking questions about Carlos, about the dojo, about the kids who trained there. When they arrived at the small martial arts school, word had somehow spread. A dozen kids were waiting outside, their faces pressed against the windows. These weren't wealthy kids from the suburbs taking karate lessons. These were neighborhood kids, many from single-parent homes, many who had found in Carlos Martinez's dojo the stability and discipline they couldn't find anywhere else. Inside, Carlos was teaching from a chair. The cancer had weakened his body, but his voice was still strong as he guided his students through their forms. When Jean-Claude walked through the door, Carlos stopped mid-sentence. The room fell completely silent. "Mr. Martinez," Jean-Claude said, approaching the man who had spent 2 decades teaching kids to never give up. "Your son tells me you're a fan of my movies." Carlos, struggling to stand from his chair, managed a weak smile. You don't know what your movies meant to us. When things got hard, when I wanted to quit, I'd remember your characters. They never gave up, so we never gave up." Jean-Claude knelt down beside Carlos's chair, eye level with the man who had turned his admiration for fictional characters into real-world heroism. "Mr. Martinez," Jean-Claude said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've got it backwards. You're the hero here. These kids, your son, this place you built, this is real. What I do is pretend. What you do is change lives." The legacy. Jean-Claude spent 3 hours in that dojo that day. He worked out with the kids, shared stories about the discipline required for martial arts, and listened as Carlos talked about each student, their struggles, their progress, their dreams. When it was time to leave, Jean-Claude made a promise that went far beyond Hollywood publicity. "Mr. Martinez," he said, "this dojo will never close. Whatever you need, whatever these kids need, I'll make sure it happens." Carlos passed away 6 weeks later. At his funeral, hundreds of people filled the small church, students from across 2 decades, parents whose children had found direction in his classes, and Jean-Claude Van Damme sitting in the back row, crying for a man who had turned action movie inspiration into real-world heroism. True to his word, Jean-Claude established a foundation that kept the dojo running. Danny took over the day-to-day operations, with the action star providing not just financial support, but ongoing mentorship. The gym was renamed the Carlos Martinez Center for Martial Arts and Character Development. The real ending. The movie Final Strike was eventually completed, but it was the footage from that interrupted day that went viral. Not the carefully choreographed action sequences, but the raw, unscripted moment when Danny Martinez stopped being a background performer and Jean-Claude Van Damme stopped being an action hero. The video, shot on someone's phone, showed Jean-Claude removing his gloves, placing his hands on a crying young man's shoulders, and choosing connection over commerce, real pain over pretend drama. In interviews afterward, Jean-Claude was always asked about that moment. His answer was always the same. "I've spent my career pretending to be a hero. That day, I met real heroes. A father who never gave up, a son who honored his father, kids who found strength in a small gym in East L.A. They reminded me that the best fight scenes happen off camera, in real life, when people choose to keep going even when everything seems impossible." The dojo still operates today. Above the entrance there's a simple sign, "Never Give Up, Carlos Martinez, 1965 to 2019. And on the wall inside, next to photos of students who have gone on to college, to careers, to better lives, there's a picture of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Carlos Martinez, sitting side by side, both smiling, both understanding that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can lift others up when they need it most. Danny Martinez now runs the dojo with the same spirit his father brought to it. And every time a kid wants to quit, every time things get hard, he tells them the story of the day Jean-Claude Van Damme came to their neighborhood and learned what real heroism looks like. That's not entertainment. That's legacy. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten.